and welcome again to another program of Searching for Answers, a program designed to help you, the viewer, as well as all of us here on the panel, to better understand the Bible. My name is Carolyn Thompson, and on my right...
I'm Gerald Winslow. I work at the Medical Center at Loma Linda University.
And John Jones, the School of Religion at La Sierra University.
Bernard Taylor, Loma Linda University Church.
Ivan Blazin, School of Religion, Loma Linda University.
Well, now that we have all of our introductions out of the way, I'm just going to be quiet. I'm going to let them do all the talking, answer all the questions. But if I did go through with that, I don't think they'd come back next time. So I'm going to do my best to keep up with these scholars, okay? Now, if you would take your Bible and turn to the book of John in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and we've been studying about how Jesus is getting ready to meet his Father, but he has to go through a very difficult time first, as we know. So if you will turn to chapter 17, where Jesus prays for himself. The whole chapter has to do with Jesus' prayer. And I won't read it again, but I just want you to be sure on your own to get your Bibles and read what he has to say. And then on chapter 18, it's entitled, Jesus is Arrested. So if you will now go with us and read along with us, I'm going to ask my good friend John Jones to begin reading in chapter 18 of the book of John.
Well, yes, now the scenes begin to shift quickly, don't they?
Yes.
This has been a much more leisurely sort of conversation between Jesus and the disciples at the upper room than with Matthew, Mark, and Luke. There it's hurried, almost furtive in a way, isn't it?
Yes.
But now, after Jesus' high priestly prayer, chapter 17, now the pace quickens, doesn't it? And we sense the clouds gathering very rapidly, don't we?
Exactly.
The disciples are concerned as Jesus' countenance changes. This is the New Revised Standard Version, chapter 18, and the first paragraph or so runs down through about verse 11. So we'll see how far we can get with that and what we make of it. After Jesus had spoken these words, that is that prayer, he went out with his disciples across the Kidron Valley to a place where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. Now, Judas, who had betrayed him, also knew the place because Jesus often met there with his disciples. So Judas brought a detachment of soldiers, together with police from the chief priests and the Pharisees, and they came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Verse 4, Jesus then, knowing all that was to happen to him, came forward and asked them, "Whom are you looking for?" And they answered, "Jesus of Nazareth." And Jesus replied, "I am he." Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them, and when Jesus said to them, "I am he," they stepped back and fell to the ground, and again he asks them, "Whom are you looking for?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." And Jesus answered, "I told you, I'm he. So if you're looking for me, let these men go." This was to fulfill the word that he had spoken, "I did not lose a single one of those whom you gave me." That's a quotation from the prayer that he just uttered in chapter 17. And so then, verse 10, Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his right ear. The slave's name was Malchus. Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword back into its sheath. Am I not to drink the cup that the Father has given me?"
Okay, now here we have a setup where Jesus is to go through a trying time. And I'm sure that he sent many prayers up to his Father because he knew it was coming. And he often crossed over into the Kidron Valley. And it seems that there was like a park like there, and people who were very wealthy often had their parks outside from their house because there wasn't room. And maybe one of his friends, we don't know who, had a key, could open the gate and let the disciples, and let Jesus especially, go there, because he often went to this lovely area in the olive grove. Now Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place, because Jesus was often met there with his disciples. And so you can imagine that Judas had a plan, and that was to go and tell the soldiers and the chief priests and all of these people that Jesus would be there. Now, so we understand a little bit, the soldiers did not really know who Jesus was.
Mhm.
And that's why they treated him so badly and many times. And so then, as he started to answer the soldiers, and from what I've read, and stop me if I'm wrong, when they had a contingent of soldiers, high priests, and everybody, there's probably 200 or 300 people there, along with their armaments and their swords. And they didn't need all of that at all. Did you ever read that, John?
Yeah, it would have been a considerable crowd,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
You've got the temple itself had these peacekeepers,
Yeah.
kind of police type, and of course the soldiers are Roman, members of the Roman legion.
Right.
There were 2 legions posted there, the 10th and the 14th, if I'm remembering correctly. So this could have been quite a mob.
Quite a
anyway.
group, yeah.
Hangers-on and curiosity seekers and all the rest. you know.
That's right. Ivan, what do you think of this? Did you realize there was such a contingent, a crowd there?
Yes, I did, because I've read it. I knew that there was a crowd like this, but what really primarily interests me is verse 4. Here comes this big crowd with their lanterns, torches, and weapons.
Yes.
See, I don't know what they were expecting. Why did they bring weapons?
Swords.
But then it says, then Jesus, knowing all that was about to happen to him, came forward and asked them. It's like I don't think this is just a minor remark. He moves forward to meet his destiny here.
Yes.
He embraces his destiny.
Yes.
He knows what they're there for, and so he's not going to shirk from fulfilling his whole purpose, which will lead, on the cross to him saying, "It is finished." So this is all part of this plan, and so he
Okay.
comes forward.
Yeah. Bernard Taylor, do you have something you wanted to say?
Well, I have a question, John, further to what you were saying, and you'll probably be able to help me here. Was there anything in those days equivalent to what we would think of as the police force generally, or was that the Roman army to whatever extent there was something?
Yeah, good question, and I'm not sure I can help, Bernie. You're kind to put it that way, but apparently there were, however, 2 levels of authority. The temple police, and by the way, that's a larger version of the synagogue governor and peacekeeper. Each synagogue had a sergeant at arms, apparently. But on the temple grounds, that's where their jurisdiction held sway. That is to say, the temple police. And that apparently goes back generations, I understand. Off the temple territory, it's really the soldiers. So they've kind of made common cause here in a way, haven't they? Yeah.
Okay, did you want to say something?
No. No, well, I have lots
We'll
of
try.
questions.
Okay.
One just got answered.
Okay.
Why are the police from the temple in cahoots with the Roman soldiers who cooked up that sort of unholy
Oh, I'm
alliance?
sure a little money went back and forth there.
And then, reading this, I came to realize that we refer to the Garden of Gethsemane, but Gethsemane's not mentioned here, right? Is it the same
From Matthew,
place?
yeah.
We get that from the other
Matthew,
the other
Matthew, is that
Gospels.
right?
Matthew,
So
yeah.
that
I wondered that same thing.
so apparently, near as we can tell, it's the same place probably.
Mm-hmm.
Bernard, doesn't Gethsemane mean wine press?
Yes.
I think it does.
Yes.
Yes.
So-
Which would be a logical place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's often the case in that part of the world that you get double cropping. You have vineyards and olive trees in the same plot, and that may well have been the case here. Yeah.
I'm not too surprised that Romans and chief priests go together, because the chief priest, the high priesthood, was appointed by Rome itself, so there was a relationship between the two.
Well, of course, these ruffians on both sides really represent the collusion at a higher level
Yeah.
between the Sanhedrin and the procurator and forces.
Yeah.
And combined with the sense of a common enemy.
Yeah, they've made common cause here
Yes.
for their own
Yes.
purposes.
I mean, these are the people who keep order in the society, right? I mean, you have the people who keep religious order in the religious setting, and you have the political order keepers, I guess you could say, in the Roman contingent. So and I take it from the fact that they show up with all of these people and weapons, that they must have thought of Jesus as some sort of insurrectionist.
That's right. That's
And
right.
and Carolyn, you might say, well, why do they need the weapons and they need so many? Because you think it's a small force. But then Peter doesn't help the story by whipping out his sword. Now you know why they needed, or they probably knew why they needed weapons.
Well, it was night too, I guess, and we're used to street lights in most places, but it would have been dark and they weren't sure where they were going, although they'd probably have some sort of something
Lantern,
to light the night.
yeah.
But still, that only goes so far, and who knew what was lurking beyond that and what they might be walking into. Is Judas leading them into a trap, or
Yeah.
to what extent can
Yeah.
they trust him, because he's immediately past one of them? And
I guess one thing that does surprise me about the story is that Peter can whip out his sword and lop off the ear. I don't know, was it the whole ear or part of the ear? Sort of the image of like Van Gogh slicing off his ear. And there's no, I mean, if that happened today, you'd think this is going to create some sort of
Really?
ruckus.
That's right.
But then it doesn't seem like that.
No.
It doesn't
It doesn't.
eventuate that way.
Aren't you surprised a little bit? Jesus asks this big crowd, he comes forward and he says, "Who are you looking for?"
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, he knows full well, of course, they're looking for him, but
Right.
this is a way of introducing it, I guess, or for them identifying him right off.
Well, the feeling I have there is that he's, in a sense, taken charge of the situation.
which he does so often in John's
In John.
Gospel.
Yeah.
This is the gospel of the take charge Jesus. That's true.
Yeah, he's
Yes.
he's going to preempt, I suppose, their surprise by just telling
Yeah.
them who he
Yeah.
is.
Now, the first time he told him, "I am he," who are you looking for? Jesus. Well, I am he. They fell back onto the ground.
Yeah, we need to understand what's going on here. Our translations have problems with that little expression,
Yeah.
so they all have it as "I am he." But there is no predicate in that expression. It's literally "I am." And there's a kind of majestic claim within itself that goes way back to Egyptian practice. The great Egyptian gods always pronounced themselves as divine that way. They would say, "I am." And so here, in a way, we see Jesus using this as an opportunity to somehow make this a quasi-divine claim. And at that moment, the flash of light, or whatever it was that drives them back, seems to reinforce
Right.
the awesomeness of the pronouncement in a
Sure.
way, doesn't it?
Well, in a sense, though, at first, there are two levels here. You're looking for someone? Well, I'm the one you're looking for.
Yeah.
But when he says, ego eimi, I am, and then we hear the notes
Yeah.
from the Old Testament, God saying, I am
To Moses.
that I am. And so you
Anihu.
know that's a big theological depth that John is projecting us into here. I am the one. I am.
John is the master of double meanings, and we see it happening again here. We've seen it repeatedly through this gospel. Here again, the pronouncement works on two levels. Yeah, I'm the guy you're looking for, but on the other hand, that kind of divine thunder is behind it, isn't it?
And this is the third of three absolutes
Yes, in the gospel.
in the gospel. Yeah.
And by absolute, you mean?
Where he simply says, I am. In Greek, ego eimi really is a nonsense expression, because eimi means I am. Ego eimi is something like, as for me,
Yeah.
I am.
Yeah.
But it
But
begs a predicate,
It breaks
doesn't
I am what?
Yeah.
And as he said in John 6, at the when he walked on the water. On the one hand,
Yeah.
he said it's the equivalent of it's me, more formally it is I, but on the other hand, it was of the nature of a theophany. And then John 8:58, before Abraham was,
Yeah.
I am.
Yeah.
And then here is the third time, but this time we see the power that accompanies it, and everybody just falls down. They step back and fall down, have no idea what happened. I don't know whether everybody thought that everybody stumbled over everybody or what. For them, it would have been a confusing and an embarrassing experience. Here is the force, and it just collapses.
Do you think that the Father had something to do with when he said, I'm the one you're looking for, and they fell back? Do you think that had something to do with God the Father showing them that here was somebody divine they were dealing with? I don't know. I wondered that. What do you say?
One last time. Because from here on out, God is not going to intervene.
Okay.
So except for the rending of the
Yes.
temple curtain. So here we have the potential is shown, what God could do, but now God steps back. The Father withdraws from this
Okay.
point on.
All right.
You know, I think what moves me in part about this is that even at this moment, when the real conflict is now launched in this paragraph, nonetheless, Jesus, ravaged as he is by this agonizing time of prayer in the garden, his thought now at this moment is for the disciples.
Yeah, if you go back to chapter 17 in the prayer of Jesus in that chapter, verse 24, Father, I want those you have given me to be with me where I am, and to see my glory, the glory you have given me because you loved me before the creation of the world. Now, here we have a few words that tells us that Jesus is truly God, as God is, because he says, because you loved me before the creation of the world. And I don't know if people realize that Jesus was right there when God created things. And I think it's a very important verse, and we tend to just skip over it. But
Well, if you remember chapter 1, of course,
yes.
it says that all things were made by him, and without him there's nothing made that was made.
Well, sometimes people go right, they say,
Yeah.
I don't know, I don't like the Old Testament, I don't understand it. And they'll go right to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So I just thought it was an affirmation of what is said in the Old Testament.
But I couldn't help but think, and I suppose because we've just studied earlier John 17, when it says that this fulfills what he said about none of them will be lost. None of
Yes.
the disciples will be lost.
Yes.
But in verse 12 of chapter 17, it says, while I was with them, I protected them in your name that you have given, the ones that you've given me. I guarded them, and not one of them was lost except the one destined to be lost.
That's right.
And so here he's saying none of them were lost, but he's standing in the presence of, I mean, it says it fulfills that, but he's standing in the presence of one who was destined to be lost.
That's right.
That's a hard saying, too.
It is a hard
One
saying.
destined to be
Be
lost.
Yeah.
We read the story backwards,
Mhm.
you know. What we know came to be in our estimate of Judas and so on. So we read that back, but right at that point, this is a striking statement, you know. The one destined to be lost.
And Peter, he's right there. He takes his sword out and cuts off his ear. I thought, it's a wonder he didn't do more damage. He did cut him
He
off.
was going for the throat. He was not very good at it, and the
Yeah.
fact that he got the servant did like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
But obviously, either Peter was left-handed or he was on the backstroke, one or the other.
And Jesus reacted and said,
Yeah,
now listen, don't
yeah.
interfere here. Are you going to prevent me from going to to where I'm supposed to go at this time?
Yes.
Don't do that. Put your sword away.
I think in the popular mind, Jesus was being lumped with plenty of insurrectionists. There were
Yeah.
roving bands of zealots working the territory up and down on the other side of the Jordan. And I think Jesus was simply lumped in with them, and that's why they expected a fight. That's why they came with this.
Yeah, but it's
accoutrement.
such a big
And
group.
so, yeah,
And
well,
here's
because
Jesus. He's by himself.
they thought they were going after a band of zealots, I think.
I guess.
Well, later, and I won't try to preview it, Carolyn, other than to say we're coming up to a verse where Jesus says, if my kingdom were of this world, my followers, my disciples would fight
That's right.
to keep from handing me over. But he makes it clear that's not. I have a hunch. It just seems to me Jesus would be really disappointed by this response of Peter, because it indicates that even someone that close to Jesus hasn't really gotten as we'd say today, he didn't get the memo yet
Yeah.
that that isn't what the kingdom is about.
Well, thinking-
swords and lopping off ears or heads.
This won't be John, of course, but in Matthew 16 we know that, Peter makes the great confession, but then all of a sudden, far be it from you to suffer,
Yeah.
and so on. That's just can't happen to you. And so Peter attempts to dominate the scene. He takes action. He's always taking action.
I think this story was important in the early church and still is for us today. We may say, well, Peter didn't get it. Well, I think it's always a temptation for us to yield to the inner human heart that calls us always to triumphalism, to imperialism. And I'm going to take a moment here to just say there are a lot of Christians who today take the name of Jesus, but who have this same spirit about them. Dominionism, I'm going to use the word because it's rampant across our land today, is really, I think, a perversion of the Christian gospel that echoes the spirit of Peter here, not the spirit of Jesus. My kingdom is not of this world was a saying of Jesus that carried generations of Christians through suffering and hardship, endurance, without lashing back. But unfortunately, there are groups of Jesus followers, as they call themselves today, who have forgotten this message.
Well, you're saying that, John, reminds me of a passage from Mennonite scholar John Howard Yoder, and I can't quote the passage exactly, but essentially what Yoder says is there's nothing sadder in some parts of Christian history than the attempts of Christian followers to use the sword of the state to accomplish what they didn't seem to be accomplished even in the church by the power of the Spirit. And that's been a tension always in human beings, to want to use some element of force, the kingdoms of this world, that's what the sword would represent here, to accomplish what in fact was a matter of faith in the
That's
kingdom
what
of heaven.
Judas was all about. He thought,
Yes.
I will force Jesus
Yes?
to set up his kingdom on this earth. And look how it turned
Yeah,
out.
I think Judas and Peter are placed at the same end of the spectrum in the
Yeah.
stories as we have
Yes,
it.
I think
We
so.
need to learn something from
I have an article at home. Comes from First Things, the magazine First Things. It's called The Virtue of Hatred.
Oh my.
Yes, it's written by a Jew. And the Jew makes a contrast between Christians and Jews. Christians say, we should have compassion and love one another. And the Jew is very interested in justice and in fighting against evil. Now, I think that's a worthy fight, too. Now, I guess the questions would be, what kind of weapons do we use? What kind of fight do we have? But we certainly have to stand against evil. We can't just let evil go on its way. How do we stand?
That's true. Well, what about the evil that's going on in this world? Should Christians stand up and say, we're not going to put up with this? Let's see what we can do. Things aren't going right in the world. There's all these kingdoms in the Middle East, and all these countries are going down one after the other. And what are we going to do about that?
That brings me back to verse 8, John, that you quoted before, and I really find it remarkable So if you're looking for me, let these men go. And the room that Jesus creates for the disciples, it's okay if you leave. I'm going through with this. But somebody in that situation to be so forgiving, to create the space. Now John stays close, as we'll see as we go along, and Peter's a little further behind. But there are many people who would say, look, if you don't understand what I'm about, if you don't stick with me, then that's it. But this was a skirmish. This didn't determine the outcome, the final outcome, and they will get through this as best they can. And Jesus makes that space at the outset. Yeah. I just find it difficult to even begin to comprehend, and the depth of understanding at that time.
Well, do you hear underneath Jesus' words, remember, I am in charge. I'm in control. You know, that there's an implicit call to trust in him, that, you know, at this point.
Well, we have about 40 seconds left, and I think that chapter 18 and the first few verses we've gone, I think we went up to chapter 11, have been very helpful for us in this day and age, the way Jesus handled himself. He realized, after his prayer, he never turned to the right or to the left. He was going straight through, and he knew what he had to do and what he had to put up with. And we should be forever, ever thankful for what he went through to save us from our sins.